Good morning, welcome to Sales TV. It's absolutely brilliant to be back here at the GT Studios at Cranfield University. It's a bit of a snowy day, so a bit of a trek to get here. We're here, and we are joined today by a great person. I've had the opportunity to interview her twice, a lovely lady called Kate Philpot, who is Global Vice President of Sales Enablement at Getty Images. Kate, welcome.
Hey, good morning, Andy. Thank you for inviting me along.
Not a problem at all. Delighted to go through a really interesting topic today. But before we start, Kate is flued up. So if a cough sweep goes in or a Kleenex comes out, bear with, because she's battling through this and doing us a real honour today by kind of coming in to do the show. If it was me, that would be man flu, and I'd be doing it from a hospital bed somewhere. Kate, we're going to talk about why it's so hard to get sellers to change their approach. But before we kind of delve into that, can you tell people a little bit about yourself and the things that you do for Getty?
Yes. So I've been with Getty Images for actually coming up to 10 years, scarily. I lead the sales enablement function. We are a relatively small team that we've got. Somebody in Sydney who's responsible for the APAC region, a couple of people plus myself in EMEA, and then actually very recently now 4 people in our Americas region, and we're responsible for everything from onboarding new hires through skills training, manager training, coaching, and manager training specifically with references sales, coaching, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then sometimes we also get involved in helping with recruiting, with performance managing. I guess I would say fingers in many pies.
Yeah, it sounds like the little Dutch person actually, the fingers in many pies and dice. Yeah. So
yeah, it feels that sometimes.
We've talked about this on stage, and this is a wider audience we're bringing this to. But what we want to talk about today is why is it so hard to get sellers to change their approach? So kind of the first question is, what are the biggest issues you hear sales leaders complain about when it comes to sellers' approach to revenue generation?
Yeah, and I guess, just to even to back up a step, I think it's probably right that we acknowledge that it's difficult to get people to change, period. And then you overlay onto that, getting sellers to change. A lot of the same reasons show up. But the things that I hear from sales leaders are, for example, that sometimes sellers are more reactive than proactive. So, if there's inbound customer query, jump on it, crack on, turn it around in a super quick time. Yes, absolutely. But the proactivity isn't always there. And maybe the confidence to be proactive isn't there. Being therefore a bit more transactional than is ideal, not having a sufficient level of curiosity, and that is all about the quality of the questioning, which again maybe we'll get into a bit more in a few minutes. And then not investing time on strategy, so really thinking about how do I navigate through this organization to develop relationships that I don't already have, rather than leaning on the one person that And that's a function of maybe not being sufficiently methodical in the approach. And I think that the one thing that I think is most challenging to really address is the absence of a growth mindset. So, it's one thing to show up with some of those challenges. It's another thing to flat out say, yeah, but I like the way that I do things right now. Or, as I guess a lot of people watching this will have heard, yeah, but what I do works for me. As if that's then a flat reason not to at least interrogate, well, what else might I do that might make me more successful?
Yeah, I think there's 2 words that, 3 words actually, but in 2 bits. You mentioned curiosity. I wonder if you think that people don't have enough time to be curious, and growth mindset, again, is that grounded in people just don't have enough time to step back and think about, well, where are they today? Where do they want to go as individuals in terms of their skills? Do you have the time to be curious? Those 2 things seem grounded in people probably being too busy to clear the headspace to think about some of these things?
Yes and no. I mean, I think we're all really busy, and I can look at my Outlook calendar over the last couple of weeks, and it would be mostly meetings and not many spaces.
Right.
But I also think it's a bit of a cop out. If it's important enough, you'll prioritize it, and I say that to myself often because in fact we were talking about this just a couple of days ago in the context of something else. If you don't carve out the time to think, if you don't carve out the time, so if you're going to be curious, what do you need to do? You need to think about the kinds of questions that you're going to ask a customer. If those questions are not sufficiently practiced, that they are front of mind and roll off your tongue in every conversation, then you're probably going to need to prepare them. There's the balance, or just shifting the balance of investing the time in preparing so that you can actually deliver a more efficient, effective call, which ultimately will save you time. That mindset shift is a challenge that I think some sellers struggle to wrap their heads around. But in order to do that, you need to first prioritize being better at generating business.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, you need to carve out some time in your calendar. So, for example, what I started doing lately is having meetings with myself. And I put into my calendar slots of at least an hour for that very reason, because I think, as we would all acknowledge, 10 minutes between Zoom calls where you've probably got enough time to go to the loo and make a drink is not enough time to do thinking. I was saying to this person the other day, in thinking space, you need time to stare out the window and for nothing really to happen for a little while. It takes time to think. And if you don't dedicate that time, and I'm not sure that I fully subscribe to the fact that people don't have the time. It's just that kind of time is a bit confronting in and of itself. It's rewarding to be busy. It's rewarding to check things off your to-do list. It's not as immediately rewarding to think. And actually, I read there's a really good book. What's the title of it? Hold on, I'm just going to look at my Deep Work. That's it.
Okay.
By which is exactly about this stuff. That not to spend too much time on kind of some of the theories, but that we have been conditioned over recent years not to spend time on deep work because we're so distracted by stuff. The bells, the whistle, the pings on your phone, the alerts that are flying across the side of your screen. And all of that is actually stopping us from taking the time to do that the really high quality work where proper value is to be found. And linking back to the conversation of a couple of days ago, turning off the alerts, switching off the bells and the whistles and all the rest of it, so that you can stare out the window for a few minutes and wait for an idea to come, is quite confronting, but it's also really rewarding because that's where the value is to be found.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. And one of the things, Kate, that we're looking to do with Sales TV and the ISP is each episode have that one takeaway for a salesperson. And I think you've just, I know we're going to uncover more, but the one thing a salesperson could do is absolutely do meetings with yourselves. And that's just a nugget for me. I never put time in that actually that's my time to have that reflection and think time, either for my own research or actually just in my own day. And so there's that one takeaway for this episode. You heard it from Kate. Put meetings in with yourself. So we've talked about...
By the way, that's not your lunch.
Okay.
I think that's the other thing. It's easy to go, oh, well, I'll do that over lunch. No, you won't. You'll be eating your lunch. So it's separate to that. And it's about what you prioritize.
That's really, really good. So the next question, we talked about, we asked you what you hear about sales leaders complain about. Typically, how do you see sales managers trying to drive change?
Well, I think, again, hopefully people watching this will recognize a long list of KPIs. So, obviously there's the obvious lagging indicator, which is hit the numbers or not, and maybe hit profit if that's a measure that's important to your business. And then there are the leading indicator KPIs, which theoretically tell you whether the numbers are going to come. And that list can get ever longer. So just bear with me. Sorry, excuse me. more actions, so more things that people are expected to do, and some of those are completely legitimate. In fact, most of that are completely legitimate. Um, More focus on it being managers' responsibility to make those things happen. And then, I guess there's the kind of stick as well as the carrot. Well, if you don't do it, then there'll be consequences. Of course, there will. But I'm not sure that, I mean, if I think across all the businesses that I've worked for over the years, I don't know that managing by fear or threats is ever very effective.
No, unfortunately, no one told me that, and I'm being very sick. No one told me that until it was too late. I'd already kind of got that kind of, because no one actually coached me. So
Yeah,
you wear your heart on your sleeve, and if you're under pressure, you just naturally transferred that pressure and threat to somebody else. And actually, if I look back, being very, very transparent, and there was sometimes I now put my head in my hands and go, that was really, really poor behaviour. That such to the point that person actually moved to Australia.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because again, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true that people tend not to leave the organization, they'll leave their manager. And, sometimes, of course, as organizations, we want to encourage some churn, but there are ways of doing that I think, in a thoughtful and compassionate way. And we'll get on to, what one of the key ways in which you bring that to fruition. But I think a really important question for somebody who is maybe not successful in the role in the way that you want them to be is, what is it about this job that you like? What is it about this job that makes you happy? What is it about this job that makes you jump out of bed in the morning? Because if there aren't some compelling answers to that question, chances are you're not in the right job in the first place.
Yeah, and doesn't that lead us back to that? How many people fall into sales?
Right?
Still today, I suspect a lot of people do, because it is a job which there's lots of them by proportion compared to other jobs, and there's relatively little academic bar to get into them. Well, I'm not going to go talking to personal branding in this one, but you're right. I think from some of the statistics that we've seen in the institute and Cranfield, about 25% of people are leaving the sales role within the first 18 months, which is not a great statistic if we think we're going to improve attraction and retention and talent. You talked about KPIs, you talked about things that people would recognize that managers do. How successful do you think they are in doing these things?
I mean, I think they can be. But for example, you could talk about, well, you need to do X number of dials a day, or you need to do Y number of meetings a month. That's a quantitative KPI. And yes, there's probably some correlation between the number of times that you speak to a customer and the amount of revenue that will result. But what you don't get out of that is any kind of qualitative assessment. So for me, the value is in matching those two things up. One, quantity, and two, quality.
Right.
And the quality comes through different ways of assessing.
So you're starting to potentially signpost here, Kate, an alternative way that people could be doing things. So if there were alternatives that you could recommend to sales leaders and managers, what would they be?
Well, for me, one of the most important things that I think we've lost sight of over, well, I say recent times, certainly probably the last 10 years or so, is coaching. And by that I mean really coaching, not giving feedback, not saying to a rep, oh, well, I know what you just did, but here's how I would have done it. That's not coaching. Nor is, we'll do it like this because you'll be more successful. That's not coaching either. Coaching is coming to a conversation with a rep and with a sense, again, with that word that I keep banging on about, curiosity, asking the rep, what happened in the call? What was your intention in the call? How did you prepare for the call? What did you define as successful outcome? What did you actually achieve? What do you think the reasons for that are? And unpacking their thought process in getting to where they arrived at. And then, based on the rep's assessment of that, call, which of course backing up a step means you had to be there or you have to watch a recording of it. You can then get to a coaching conversation which will go in one of two directions. If the rep thinks it was amazing and you don't, then there's a set of coaching questions which might be designed to bring awareness to the fact that there's a gap between their perception and your reality. But if they think it was not good and you agree, then you're going to have a slightly different coaching conversation. But I think the goal here is to create some independence of thought. I remember years ago, I mean, my first job when I started in sales was at Mars Confectionery, and it was an expectation that your manager would come out with you for a day of visiting corner shops once a month, and they did. And after every call, the expectation was that you will talk to your manager about what happened, what went well, what didn't go well, what you're going to do differently next time. I mean, those are the kind of the fundamentals of sales coaching, which I mean, luckily I had that foundation and I've since gone on and done, a coaching qualification, but that's been the basis on which I have seen or saw my own sales skills develop. And I think we miss a trick if we don't invest time in helping our reps to understand that they may have, for example, fallen into repetitive behaviors. It's just like driving a car. Somebody probably did teach you how to sell back in the day, but maybe you've decided over the years that you could cut some corners, and then you keep cutting those corners and you forget what the standard is that you ought to be operating to. Or on the other hand, nobody ever taught you. They just gave you a buck of business and said, well, off you go, sink or swim. And you're right. I know a lot of, entry level sellers for whom that is the reality. I mean, it's absolutely awful. So, if you bimble along and it kind of works for you, well, yes, I can see why you would be nervous about changing. And that's where the coach comes in. What is it about the way that you're working right now which is good? What might you want to do differently? How efficient are you right now? What would you like to save time? How much did you establish when you asked the questions that you asked in this conversation? What else might you have found out? What kind of questions were you asking? I mean, that's all of the stuff which is the fundamentals of sales. But it's so much more empowering to ask those questions, to pose those questions to somebody and have them give you the answers rather than you just tell them, well, here's the 22 things that you didn't do right in that call.
No,
I think
you're absolutely spot on. I think we've got some great comments coming in here. So from Dr. Dale Childs, nail on the head. Many managers don't know how to really manage and aren't trained on how to do so or how to coach. From my own experience at one or two conferences, when people actually ask, how do I coach? Well, okay, are you aware about how many different coaching styles and disciplines there are? And you as sales managers probably start off as, I read the Alex Ferguson or the All Blacks coaching book and consequently I'm fully qualified. It's like, no, if you get into coaching, be prepared that you may well end up with the respondent going, you know what, I really, as you say, this is not for me. Nothing in this role gets me out of bed in the morning, and off I go. And how are you actually gonna cope with that as a manager when someone turns around to you and says, thank you, you've just effectively coached me out of the job because I think it sucks?
Well, now you see, we've been having this conversation, within the revenue organization at Getty Images. I personally, and I think a lot of my colleagues would agree, there's nothing wrong with arriving at a conclusion that says this is not a job that makes me happy. I mean, goodness knows, you spend a lot of time at work. And if you are not in a job that makes you bounce out of bed in the morning, at least some of the time, I mean, let's not pretend that, every day is a bag of roses, because of course it isn't. But it's got to be more often than not something that makes you feel fulfilled. If you arrive at a point where the person that you're coaching says, you know what, this job doesn't make me happy, and the things that you need me to do, I actually don't feel comfortable doing, then fine, go be happy doing something else. In parallel, though, sales leaders, and this is a conversation we've just been having, need to invest a lot more time in proactively recruiting so that you've got those two strands. Yes, there might be people in my team who find more fulfillment elsewhere, but in parallel, I'm going to be researching the market and identifying people who are, vocal on LinkedIn or show up at events and really demonstrate their chops. I'm going to be building relationships with those people in anticipation that at some point in the future I might have an opening. And that could be, 12, 18, 24 months down the line. But if you're not building those relationships, it makes it a lot harder when that person, let's say that person does resign, because then of course you're managing the vacancy, and everybody knows that sales managers don't like vacancy because revenue. But yeah, ideally you've got people reasonably ready to slot in behind that person should they eventually decide that that this is not the job for them.
There's a great friend of mine, Volker Weiss, who actually worked at UPS and about 15 years ago. He actually, to your point where you join a company and leave a manager, they decided that they were actually going to have a proper sales academy where actually a manager would not get their hands on a single person that was in that academy. And then they would nurture those people. And to your point, when somebody did decide to move on, it might have been a promotion, someone could seamlessly move into that role, which is great. Some wonderful comments keep them coming. Dr. Lee Williams, habit and accountability coaching. How do you actually build that muscle memory up, which is absolutely great. And we have another great one here from Wayne. Great interview. So that's you, not me, because you turned up and you're battling through it. I also feel that coaching should also be delivered on an individual basis, using sales activity performance data to drive coaching conversations. What's your thoughts around that?
Totally agree. And to come back to the cadence point, sorry, just bear with me.
Keep going, Kate.
To the cadence point, what we've done as a business over the last couple of years is, number one, we have actually run a program for our managers where we train them on what coaching is. And we covered the GROW model. We have a version of that for our managers that they now use. And what we ask them to do, so they have a KPI, which is a minimum of one coaching session per rep per quarter. But the expectation is actually that they're doing it monthly, and they're using the coaching methodology that they've been trained on. And I'm very fortunate. I hired a sales coach a couple of years ago, and off the back of her success, we've just hired another sales coach. So they are the two people who are now running a program with the managers to train them to be better at coaches. So part one is send me a recording of you coaching a rep. And their coaching is centered on sales calls. So we use Zoom and Salesforce ECI, so Einstein Conversation Insights. Other tools are available to interrogate the data. So you get a sales call, you get insights attached to that sales call. And what that then allows you to do, now it's interesting that Salesforce sell ECI as a coaching tool because you can add comments to what happens in the call. And for me, categorically disagree. That is not coaching, that's feedback. The only thing that makes it coaching is if you take that call, you review the call, both of you, and then you sit down and you have a conversation about what happened, which is what we're doing with the managers. So step one is record yourself delivering the coaching. Then my two coaches have a conversation with managers on a one-to-one basis way, so to your point. And then over the course of 6, probably 8 sessions, depending on the person, they will evolve their coaching. And then the final stage is that they resubmit a recording of themselves coaching, hopefully with improvement between point 1 and point 2. So we're trying to build that that coaching muscle to the other point. It's not easy, and I would be lying if I said that every single manager has just gone, oh my god, this is amazing, where do I sign? Some have really got it. The light bulb has gone on and they have gone, wow, I get this. I see how this is going to make me a more effective leader. And others, it's not that they don't believe that, but it's been harder for them to make it happen. And so they've needed a bit more support. But the value is actually that the reps are starting to see, so many reps came to sessions with Sam, my coaching in the UK, and I do a fair amount of it myself. The initial meeting was always, oh, that's not what I thought it was going to be. So oftentimes reps in particular, perception of coaching is that it's in some way punitive. I'm only being sent here because I've done something wrong. And when they realized, based on the experience that they had, that that wasn't how we were going about it, they were a lot more open to the idea of being coached. And when you're able to shine light on areas that they may not be seeing themselves, because, to our earlier point, very rarely do reps come out of a meeting with a customer and give themselves 10 minutes to analyze why the result that they had from that meeting is the result that they had. In other words, what specifically did I do to contribute to this outcome? If they're not taking that time to self-analyze, then how are they ever going to improve? So that's the job of the coach. And now we've got thousands of recordings in our platform that the reps can go back and review. And it's interesting because the way that we have set it up, when the call is coached, the record actually says, manager, I've had the coaching session, and the rep then adds their coaching commitments. With some reps, you can really see progress because that's happening monthly. With others, very, very consistently, same coaching commitments. I need to ask better questions. I need to ask better questions. So at some point, as a coach, you'll be going, okay, so what's stopping you? And that's where you can start to hold feet a little bit more to the fire.
So I think what's fascinating about that, we talked about, the first takeaway being, put meetings in with yourself. The second takeaway, if you're a sales rep, is turn up to that with an open mindset, because it's not coaching because something's gone wrong. It is absolutely coaching to help you develop. And if you don't develop, then you're going to stay stagnant. You are not, as a salesperson, going to be at that same place for the next 10 years.
To go to Andy, go back to that sporting analogy, which we have lent on heavily in presenting coaching as a possible direction in the business. I can't think of, and I'm sure people watching today wouldn't be able to think of, any sports person at the top of their game who doesn't invest in not just one coach but several coaches, or teams rather, several coaches to help them stay there. I mean, it's just unheard of. The tennis stars will have a forehand coach, a backhand coach, a conditioning coach. They invest in people to help them to stay at the top. And to your earlier point about sales being not as professionalized and as maybe as well regulated as it could or should be, these are the kind of things that make a difference. Investing in professional development, it's really important.
I think you're absolutely right. I keep saying that as if I've got some sick of, but we think a lot of the same. But just to kind of ground that in some research, there's some, not in sales, but he's a great academic called Anders Ericsson, looks at deliberate practice, exported that into deliberate learning. The point being that it was grounded with athletes, chess players, musicians, aviators, that these people actually take a view that I will do deliberate learning. To that point, I will put time in my own diary to do that learning myself, and I will then practice what I have learnt. In sales, what they've found is they try and leap into deliberate performance, which is back to that point. Is what I'm saying is I don't have time to learn, don't want to set aside time to learn, and I don't actually want to practice. I'm just going to do it on the job. Kate, we've got 1 minute to go. Closing thoughts for me. It does go quickly, yeah? What would be your closing thought for the audience if they were in your position?
Oh gosh. I think there's a couple of things. I would say telling is not always the answer. This is adult learning. It's adult professional development. Telling people what to do invariably will not give you the outcome that you are hoping for. So on the other hand, maybe booking that time with yourselves to consider how you might train your managers to do things differently, and having your managers consider coaching, true coaching, as a way of getting that shift of behavior change that you're looking to cause, might be a worthwhile thing to consider.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm glad we've got your thinking out in front of an audience of thousands. I would like to say thank you to all of the audience for participating. one last comment from Dale, akin to personal development. All top athletes, to your point, are doing that psychological, physical, tactical development of themselves. A great comment to end on. Thank you, Dale. With that viewpoint, thank you to everybody here at Cranfield, for Chris, for Robin, for David, for everybody here for making this live and an event that's brilliant. Thank you for your engagement, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the US edition and in the next week for another session of Sales TV. Thank you again, Kate.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.